had a blowout. That'll be the time.
Well, we're not going to explain that little bit if it made it onto this recording. We'll just let people wonder what we were talking about. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt Santy. Yeah, right. I'm Heather Burnt Santy. Joined by Richard Cohen. And for those of you watching, recording for the first time since my hair started falling out. So I've got this fancy new wig for recording.
Yes, watch the video version of this later in the week after the podcast comes out, because you will appreciate Heather's new do.
It's hot. Here's what I've learned. I was really, of course, had some fear about losing all my hair and being bald or whatever. And I've decided that it's just too hot to wear wigs and hats. So I'm just going to be bald. And if people don't like it, they can lump it.
That's right.
And, but I thought the wig was fun for podcasting. So
absolutely. You go girl. You do you. Screw anyone else who doesn't support you.
Right. That's in a whole other t-shirt while we're planning out our t-shirts. So Richard and I are, we did a couple of episodes when you first started recording with me, Richard, about teaching college students, and sort of had intentions of making that a regular thing, and then found so many other things to record about that it's been a while since we got to this. So we're going to do one today, and we've got another one in the works because we're both, in addition to being wonderful conversationalists and brilliant podcasters, also college instructors of early childhood education.
And just to mention to your audience, since you're too humble too, I do not have that particular issue, but you do. Since we recorded those, you're now a department chair.
That's true. Well, they call me a program
coordinator. Yeah. So these subjects that we're about to talk about we're almost even more passionate about it because we're immersed in it.
Right. Yeah. When we first started, I was, just an adjunct, just starting to teach students at college. And now it's the dream job that's been not quite as dreamy this week.
I warned you, it's not really dreamy this week.
Once I turn in that self-study and the teaching part,
NAEYC self-study for anyone listening.
Yes. Then I'll be a little bit dreamy again, maybe.
Yes. And for anyone who's been through the NAEYC self-study process, Heather will gladly accept your pity, your empathy, whatever you have to share.
Right. Wine.
Yes, wine. Lots of it.
Except Indiana has weird rules about shipping wine, so they'd have to actually bring it to my house. Okay, so let's talk. I'm going to start with the quote, and then I'm going to give my sort of backstory a little bit, and then we can go. So this is from a book called Teaching Adults Revisited. It's a newer edition, Active Learning for Early Childhood Educators by Elizabeth Jones, who is a hero and a queen. And I love her.
Oh, that happens to be one of my all-time favorite books. Huh.
Teaching Adults? Yeah, I like it. I remember reading it for the first time really last summer maybe, and making all kinds of notes and intentions and then forgetting. So this one's going actually in the chemo chair with me Friday when I have 7 hours of uninterrupted time to review it all and think about it. Okay, so here's our quote. Elizabeth Jones says, "As I explain at the beginning of this class session, active participation in both talk and play is required in this course. These are necessary skills in the repertoire of adults who work with young children." So I've been rethinking this because even before I was teaching in college, I was doing a lot of training for adults. Like a couple of my jobs when I was a center director, I did workshops and meetings and trainings, and I speak at conferences. And then I had a job where I was like a teacher trainer for 4 centers. And I always tried to be I try to be very interactive. And I really want it to be not me doing all the talking. But I tried to also have this attitude of, well, they need to feel emotionally safe, and for talking out loud in front of people is not everybody's thing. And so I carried that into my college teaching. And I think it's really the virtual piece of it that's got me rethinking it, because there's always one or two who will talk and interact with me and be silly and take risks of, sharing an idea in front of other people. But there's always some who don't. And especially now that I'm doing it virtually, and some of them don't have their cameras on, and I don't even know if they're really there, but trying to, I don't know, I'm rethinking it. I started thinking I need to be a little bit stricter about making them, and strict isn't the word I want, but I need to make them understand that this is valuable. And this perspective that Elizabeth Jones gave is, if you're teaching young children, you've got to sing in front of other adults, you've got to say things and talk and make decisions and play in front of other adults. And if you're self-conscious about it all the time, that's going to be sort of a barrier to doing what we need to do with children. So that's the approach I want to take in my classes now with these adults who are working or are going to work with young children.
So it's a question of how.
Yeah.
What's the best way to do that?
Yeah.
So can I facilitate you for a moment?
Please.
Okay. So knowing this book, which is so dear to me, I know that the bigger idea that she puts forth in that book, beyond that one piece that you said, is that whatever we do in terms of professional development or preparational development, right, which for listeners, that's kind of what we might call, teaching community college, is theoretically preparing them for the job. Although I don't know about you, Heather, but many of my students are currently working out there, as assistant teachers and things. But okay. So one of the things she says is that whatever we do in our teacher preparatory or professional development work should be a metaphor for what we want them to be doing, or what research says they should be doing with the young children in their care. And it's our job to point out the metaphor for them so that they understand that what they're experiencing in class is a meta experience. There's the content, and then there's how you're experiencing the content, so that you have your own personal experience of what it might or should feel like for young children. So I would say, when you were speaking, I heard you talk about what you and Elizabeth or Betty thought the teachers should do. But let's start with asking, what is it we expect of children in early childhood as it relates to play and singing and dancing? Do we require it of them? Or how do we facilitate their, because let's say I'm with a group of random diverse 3-year-olds. Some of them are introverted, some of them are extroverted. I don't know yet. Some of them may have sensory integration disorder. Some of them may have trauma at home. If I just say, hey, let's all sing this song or play this game, it's being received by very diverse ears and minds and hearts that have very different contexts in which that invitation is being offered. So how do we, I think that starting the journey of how do we do that with our college students starts with asking ourselves, how do we do that with young children?
Sure.
And so how would you answer that question?
Well, my initial thought, which is not my complete thought, I'll just preface that. My initial thought was, well, most children, just by nature of how children grow and develop, are more playful and more willing to speak. But it depends. We sort of unlearned that as we get to be older. That's right. And I think the typical school system is complicit in that by teaching compliance and sitting and being quiet. And as long as people are passively sitting, we assume that they're getting the information we need. So then they have to unlearn what they've, we have to do another unlearning as adults to participate in those ways, or to appreciate why it's important for children to participate in those ways. And you're right, there are children who don't want to, aren't comfortable speaking out in a group,
don't want to or can't yet,
or just would rather watch some dancing and play than participate in the dancing and play. So I think that the connection there is awareness of whoever is being seen as a leader in that setting. So if it's children and I'm the teacher, then I have to know my children as well as I can individually, and I'm not going to put someone on the spot. And I think that translates into students in a college classroom. I'm not going to say to a student who I know is sort of introverted or doesn't talk a lot out loud, but I'm not going to put him on the spot and say, get up here right now and, tell me what you've got from the text or whatever. Yeah. But I would give it some thought. I would think about, so what would be sort of a next level risk for that individual, that's still not so risky that it shuts them down. I'm not saying that I am now think that any thoughts of emotional safety in the classroom is bunk and I don't have to think about that anymore. I just feel like I had swung too far to one side and I wasn't creating spaces where it seemed like the way I was teaching was a metaphor for what I would want them to do with children, if that makes any sense. It sort of felt like I was just going around and around.
Yeah. And, so that's your learning in that area and your growth in that area. It's a great example of, right, Piaget's, spiral of equilibrium and disequilibrium.
Yeah.
So your pendulum swung way over to one way, and now you're trying to find a good middle ground, right? Yeah. So what I heard while you were just speaking, beyond my two favorite words, you're right. It was hard to keep listening after that. But what I heard is similar between teaching young children and teaching young adults is that we assume the role of a facilitator, and that we use our power in that role in the same way, which is the foundation that we often talk about in these podcasts, which is you can't get to that moment of how far do I push, how do I invite, how do I know which person to how to scaffold their learning.
I was just going to say it's very Vygotskian at this point.
Vygotskian, right? But it all starts with relationship building. Whether you're with young children or college students, you can't get to that part where you sort of individualize their experience or the curriculum without having gotten to know them and understanding this one's introverted, this one's neurodivergent, this one, I don't know, but there's something going on with them and I need to be gentle and sensitive to that. So it all begins there, right? With the relationship building with whoever is in the position of learner or whatever experiencer. But I want to also go back. You used a term that I'm not certain all of your listeners know, so maybe you could define it. Emotional safety. What does that mean?
Let me think about that because I just use it.
Yeah.
So really it's Maslow. I mean, it's the idea that if you don't feel safe, you can't move up to, experiences in that next tier, whatever that is. Right. So if you are constantly in fear of being called on and not knowing an answer or saying something stupid in front of your, colleagues or other students, something that you perceive as stupid, or, even, someone who maybe, has a lisp when they talk. And so they don't want to speak out loud, things like that.
Or English isn't their first language.
English isn't their first language. Yeah. All of those things can contribute to someone not wanting to participate in a group conversation. And so, in my desire to acknowledge that, I feel like I didn't look for any zone of proximal development. I just kind of let it go. And then I turn into a lecturer, and that's not it's not the kind of teacher I want to be. And also I know it's not in line with what we know about how anyone really learns, but adults really learn and engage with ideas. So,
but it's a really easy role to fall into.
Yes.
Not just if you're working with college age students, but if you're working with 2 and 3 and 4 year olds.
Yeah.
You can become the teacher, the lecturer, quote unquote, instead of their facilitator.
Yeah. And now that
what they're owning and what's next for them.
Yeah. Now that all of my teaching is virtual, so we're still meeting, at regular times, but we do it through Zoom instead of in the classroom. another layer of this is I'm aware that not everybody can have their camera on, right? There may be things in their background that they don't want people to see, or they don't want people to know where they live, or just different sort of economic diversity comes into that. And so then it's even easier for folks to get really comfortable not participating. And that's where I'm struggling right now, because I don't even know if they're really there sometimes because they're not talking. But
well, and also because of syncing issues, trying to sing as a group is next to impossible virtually.
Yeah. And connectivity. Camera takes up too much of your Wi-Fi or whatever the term is, then you can't participate in other ways. So I know there's lots of reasons, but so I've got one class this semester who the first week I was like, you don't have to have your cameras on, but I'd really like it if you did. And so they do. And then the other class, they only turn it on while they're talking, and then they turn it off again. And so sort of my first experiment in getting them more comfortable speaking, having discussions in class is, if there's something they're supposed to read that week, I've just asked them to take one thing that they underlined or highlighted and share it with the group and why it stood out to them. And that's been a really good sort of entry level discussion tool for me, but it's still really, really difficult in that one group.
It is, but let's just for a second notice the early childhood metaphor in what I just heard you say. So you do a really smart strategic thing, which is you let them write something ahead of time, and then all they have to do is highlight it and read it out loud. They don't have to come up with a new thought, which for some can be not only come up with a new thought, but then say it out loud without having thought it through. Which doesn't always work for every adult's learning style. And the same is true for young children. So you can't have young children highlight something they've written for a virtual class. But what's the metaphor there? What do we do for young children that also modifies the goal so that you set them up for success? What would that be?
Sorry, I started thinking about other things in the book.
Okay, well, I mean, I can jump in if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. Let me think while you talk.
Okay. For people who are just listening, Heather looks up at the ceiling when she thinks, which is maybe she has cheat notes up on the ceiling.
I don't. I have nothing but spackling or whatever you call that stuff on the ceiling.
And we're supposed to believe that. Interesting.
In this room. This space.
Okay. She also interestingly keeps looking at the palm of her left hand. I don't know what that's about. But anyways, okay. So for young children, she just came
Invisible
out of
ink.
I'm actually intelligent closet. Although she was already living outside there. But anyways, so for young children, we'd make modifications, right? So we would, if we're all going to sing a song or play a game, we wouldn't say, okay, now we're all going to sing. We're going to say, I'm going to sing a song. Whoever wants to sing with me can. And we know that then we're not going to make anyone feel like a failure who's not comfortable singing. We might say, oh my gosh, we're all building with blocks. You guys can build whatever you want. For me, I'm making a castle. So that's the metaphor there for what we do, for what you do in higher ed, which is someone could say their whole thought extemporaneously if they want. You wouldn't stop them, but you give them an easier modification if that's a more comfortable baby step for them to take, just like we do with young children. So,
go ahead.
Okay. Well, earlier we were talking about, and we've been talking about what's similar between, in that metaphor, between working with college age students and working with young children. But I'm also, in what you've been talking about, I hear something that's different, which is, well, you said a few things. One, most young children don't need to unlearn anything in order to play, right? So we may have the same goal, which is helping each human being, whether 3 or 19 or whatever, to be more playful. And we have different reasons for that. One, because for a young child, it's just a way of helping them discover how they can express themselves and their creativity and their energy in the world. And for adults, it's that. Plus, there's a professional expectation of when they do that, here's how it impacts the young children. And so that's why you need to work on that area for yourself and practice it, do it, right? But for both of us, we have this goal in mind, and it's a question of what's the right pedagogy or the methodology, the steps along the way to get those two different audiences to that place. And so, so we're talking about being playful. So I'll just mention something I learned decades ago that's still out there, and I can't stand it, but it's a landmark, whatever, in our field, which is Parton's stages of play.
Yeah.
I've never understood its purpose. It's never once helped me in 40 years as an early childhood educator. But in this conversation, I will say that one of them, although I've never thought it was a stage, it sits next to those progressive stages in that theory, which is the onlooker behavior. I don't see it as a stage. It's something different.
Yeah.
But it is something that when we're working with young children, we have to respect.
Right.
The child needs to just look and suss it all out and make sure it feels safe before they step in.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to recreate that in my course with young adults. I have to respect their onlooker stage or tendency. And just like with young children, take the leap of faith that the more I do it, the more they experience the classroom community we've created, that it's safe. Because like you said, it goes back to Maslow and that feeling of safety, and that I'm safe, that they're not going to get judged or graded. No one's going to make fun of them. You could say those words out loud on the first day of class, but what it really takes is repetitive experiencing of me and my courses to know, oh, okay, actually, he is what he says. He is his words. Oh, okay. Maybe now I'll risk singing.
Yeah. And
the same is true if children are 2, 3, or 4.
Yeah. 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 So, I have to go back to Parton for a minute because it's very much presented as these are stages that you progress through, and progression means success. And that means we are required as teachers to get from stage to stage. But she herself acknowledged that they don't go in that progression, that they can all occur with each other. And so I think it's one of those things that's been grabbed and made to fit into our deficit model. I'm the teacher mode. But the onlooker, I'm glad that you brought that up, because the onlooker play, I think, is so misunderstood and seen as a deficit.
Right.
When in fact, it's right there with what Vygotsky says about the social component of learning. Whether you're a child or an adult, there's a stage for most of us that we just are watching something before we try it out. We want to see, maybe we just want to see how it's done, or maybe we want to see that, okay, he took that risk and he's okay. And so maybe I can take that risk too.
Well, and I think the related sort of phenomenon that's coming up for me as you're speaking is, so all of our minds are structured to sort and classify all of our experiences, whatever we encounter, right? So young preschool teachers, as one random subset of human beings, they're responsible for 15 to 24 kids, right? Huge a group that they're responsible for. And so, it's exhausting, it's intense, and they're doing their best sometimes to just survive, especially if they're new, right? So their brains sort and classify what's happening around them. And so one of the ways that we human beings, one example of a way that we sort is we sort people into categories called introverted and extroverted. And then we classify them and we think, oh, introverted, which we equate with behaving nicely, is the good one. And extroverted is the one that exhausts me and seems to put a lot of energy into the room. And so it's the bad thing.
I think sometimes it's flipped.
Right. Yeah. But what happens for a lot of teachers, though, is that when they look back on their day, they were so busy trying to deal with, I'm using air quotes, listeners, the extroverted kids, that the introverted kids get forgotten about. That's the invisible child syndrome.
Right.
And teachers get concerned. Well, she's not playing. I'm going back to the onlooker thing, right? Or she's not singing. That must mean there's something wrong with her. I need to encourage her more. Right. Because I need to help her come out of her quote unquote shell.
Right.
And
or teach her play skills is the other thing we say. We have to teach her some play skills. Yeah. Well, I mean, I see that in, I saw that when I was working in the speech language preschool. That's seen, that onlooker play is seen as something that needs to be corrected a lot of times. And they see that, so they think this child is lacking in play skills because he doesn't play with others, or he doesn't play in the ways the others are playing. Right. So we need to teach them play skills, or teach them social skills. Look at our standards, so they won't be so introverted. And then, so we get messy.
Yeah. So if you look at the tools we use, the standards we have, and the tools we use to assess them in our field, often on those rubrics, being an onlooker or just watching, like you say, is seen as a deficit.
There's job evaluations, teacher job evaluations are like that too. Are you a leader? Do you show initiative? Do you collaborate? And for teachers who don't behave that way, they get docked on that rubric too.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Yeah. So I think what you're saying is it's important to notice how these ideas are structured around us and apply to college students, young children, teachers. It's all over the place. And the first step is to become aware that we are in these, we're forced to operate within these frames.
Yeah.
And we either submit to that, or we, like you and I, we rebel against it.
Sure. And maybe for me, I just need to, and this is something you bring up a lot, I need to switch from product thinking, discussion and participation, or no discussion and participation, to this process that we've been sort of talking through with this whole episode, is relationship building and understanding our own priorities and goals, and figuring out what each person might find helpful or unhelpful, and moving through it as a process, instead of saying, I just expect everybody to participate every class session. And if you don't, then you're not being risky enough to be a successful early childhood teacher.
Do you say that?
No, that was exaggerating for effect, Richard.
Okay, good. Well, I mean, dude, you got green hair. I have no idea what's real for you anymore. What's real and what's pretend.
Yeah.
So there are two little strategies I use. I never even thought of them as strategies. I just thought of them as things that I say. But I realize now that maybe they're actual strategies that help around this topic of participation in higher ed courses. So they're just things I say at the beginning of the semester. One of them is, as we go through the syllabus, and by the way, I have a lot of community college colleagues that don't agree with this being graded or having points for. And there's a lot of thinking around that. But I give points for participation. And so I explain to the students, that means you need to show up to class.
Yeah.
If you don't show up to class, you get 0 points, right? Because you're not here. Although when I go back to teaching this spring, as a side note, and 50% of my classes from our college system are required to be in person on campus. And I'm thrilled about that. I can't wait to be back with my students. I'll still keep all the things I've created online up there. They'll still need to submit their assignments using Blackboard. That's our tool. And if someone does miss a class, they could still participate in the exact same discussion on the discussion board. Yeah. So I'll give them that option, especially for those who are nervous to, or whatever reason, speaking up in a group. But okay, I'll explain to them. So here's the deal. You see here, it says participation, 5 points for each session. And we've got 16 sessions this semester, right? But what you need to know is that it's kind of like an honor system. I trust, my request to you, my invitation to you, is that you participate to whatever extent is most comfortable for you, and that week upon week, you keep pushing yourself to expand what's comfortable for you. I'm not going to be watching that carefully, but that's the goal. If you want to be a great early childhood educator, I invite you to try that this semester. So this week, maybe you'll just raise your hand. Next week, you'll raise your hand and you'll say a word. The week after that, maybe you'll say a whole sentence. Yeah. And that's okay. That's participation. Or maybe you'll just be quiet and nod for 5 weeks. I trust that you're participating in the way that's best for you and to the extent that's best for you. Keep pushing yourself, but just know that wherever you're at in that, you've got my support. I love you no matter what. It's all good.
Yeah.
Right? And then the other thing I say to them when we are getting ready, I taught before we started this recording, you were telling me we were remembering about how I was a guest lecturer in one of your college courses recently, and that you warned your students ahead of time, get ready, he's going to make you sing. Right? So I just think that's so incredibly important in early childhood higher ed coursework. One, because they don't know the songs and I want them to practice them. And two, I want to give them practice of letting go of those fears of singing. In my creativity class, there's very focused work on that for them. But in general, what I say to them before I start a song or a finger play or some, let's all hold hands and I'm going to pass the squeeze around the circle, or whatever it is, right? Whatever the play thing is, I say to them, you need to know right now, right, that I know that you're probably going to think I'm a huge weirdo, right? And here's why, because I've reached a point in my life where I don't give a shit anymore. I don't care.
Right.
I fully express.
We call that the Heather show in my
environment
classes.
I'm in, I express me. It's gotten me in trouble when I've been a corporate vice president and in other arenas, but that's me. And if you're going to be an early childhood educator, you've got to risk being fully expressed. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. And I can tell you right now, some of you in your minds are going to receive it as, oh my God, he's a huge weirdo. Oh, wow, that's creepy. That makes me feel uncomfortable. And that's mainly because you haven't been around a lot of people who are fully expressed, because that's not what our society encourages.
Right. Yeah.
But our job is to introduce young children to the world. And I would hate to pass up that opportunity that I have with them in those foundational years to show them what it looks like to be fully expressed and to model it for them.
Yeah.
So here we go.
Yeah.
The wheels on the bus go round and round, and then I do and the
yeah. Yeah.
And what's interesting to me, or what's heartening to me, is that at the end of the semester of each of my courses, I always have them do a reflection on what they found most valuable in the course. And time and again, in every single one of my courses, no matter what the topic, and in every single one of those courses, no matter what the topic, if it's an early childhood course, which it always is, there's singing and dancing and playing. It's not the content, but it's always there every week, and it's part of the context. And they all write about it. Yeah. I thought Richard was so weird in the beginning. I didn't know what to do with him. But, by week 5, I realized that's just who he is. He's not trying to trick me. He's not trying to make me do something I don't want to do. And I felt more comfortable. And by the end of the semester, I was singing and dancing.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
And so you also, just like with young children, you have to take that leap of faith.
Yeah.
That they're competent and capable in this area. And you have to be very intentional about putting it out there so they know it's what you're inviting them to work on.
Yeah. Yeah. And by explaining that connection, that adds an extra layer. Like, I'm doing this for a purpose. I'm doing this one. I mean, I am a weirdo and this is fun for me, but also this will be helpful for you when you're, doing your real work or whatever. But so that reminds me of, I'm reading this book called Spark of Learning or Sparks of Learning. And the subtitle is like using the science of emotion in the college classroom or something like that.
Okay.
Which also I want to record about once I'm done with it.
I'm in. All right.
But one of the main premise is that if there is a heightened state of emotion, we're more likely to remember what's happening, unless it's like a trauma heightens, and our brain is hijacked and we can't focus because we're surviving. But so things like laughing and having fun, but also sometimes that little bit of fear when they have to respond to some piece of information or discuss a piece of information can also have the same sort of effect of solidifying the information that they're being asked to process.
Yeah.
So when I hear you talking about singing in that way, the ones who think it's really funny have that little strengthened connection, but also the ones who are a little nervous about it will have a strengthened connection to what you're talking about in that moment.
Yeah. Similarly, I think of myself as whether I'm with young children or grownups or anyone in between, I think of myself as, I like to think of myself as a provocateur.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people think that's kind of a negative word, but for me, it connects with Reggio Emilia's provocations.
Mm-hmm.
I like the base of that word and
Yes.
what it really means.
Yes, me
And
too.
so another emotion that you can invoke in a college classroom is anger.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit, right?
A little
Too
bit.
much, and they're out of their window of tolerance, and they can no longer process it and remember it and recall it later.
Right.
But that's why there aren't any subjects that are taboo or that are off limits to me. I'll say, okay, first of all, let me acknowledge I'm a white male sitting here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the elephant in the middle of the room, because 99 to 100% of my students are not white males.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk when we go into conversations about anti-bias education, right?
Mm-hmm.
And subjects very emotionally.
Sorry, you froze for a minute. Go ahead.
Okay, for anyone listening, we suddenly froze and my brilliant words were lost into the ether of.
And Heather doesn't know how to edit, so you just get all of it.
Oh man. I don't even remember what the hell I was saying.
Anger. It was about anger.
Well, yeah. So there are some people who aren't comfortable with those topics.
And anti-bias, that's what it was.
But using the book, what you learned in that book you just read, you see how even anger, letting people get a little angry by being willing to talk about a subject instead of just reading an article about it, is one of those things that will get them into that heightened state of emotion. But that's a detour. Let's go back to participation, and it will get them to participate.
Yeah.
And then you have to facilitate that, right? You're free to share your ideas and your opinions about the video we're going to watch or this article on anti-racist education we just talked about, and just know that someone else may say something that you don't agree with or that may upset you. And part of being an early childhood professional is learning how to navigate those moments, because you'll be working with people who probably think or say similar things. And so you have to figure out how to handle that.
Children, people who will say things that you don't like or that make you angry.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I had a nickel for every time I was called Mr. Big Tummy Man by a 3-year-old, I had to get over that. I still have lots of issues around the size of my tummy. Yeah. But I had to let that one go in their service.
Yeah.
But I also want to just point out that all of this, we were talking about the ways in which that the two ideas I said earlier can be helpful. The other way that it's helpful is harkens back to the beginning of this conversation, which is letting them know it's a safe environment. So by me fully expressing myself in front of them as the weirdo that I am, it gives them permission to do that. I don't have to do that. I don't require it. But there's an unspoken permission that if I can be this way, you can be whatever your way is. And suddenly they start sharing, like, well, this thing happened to me when I was 7 and my father wasn't there. My mother hit me, or whatever it was. But to get to that point, it starts with you, the facilitator, being willing to, warts and all, just be yourself. That's the beginning of, that's one of the ingredients of meeting your goal, which is preparing teachers for a job that requires playfulness.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I'm out of ideas now.
Well, in the very beginning, you were talking about how you've done this, and we've both done workshops and, one-off gigs, sessions. And I know I'm under no illusions. I know that I can be playful with them and I can model being fully expressed, but it's missing that first part that we talked about earlier, which is relationships.
Right.
And so my expectations for what's possible for them in a one-off workshop is completely different than my expectations for someone I'm going to be with for 16 Wednesdays in a row.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be, what do I want to say? We can, well, I guess it goes back to that, the zone of proximal development, the beginning of the semester, their need for what they need from us to feel like they can and should play and participate will be very different. And our understanding gets better as the semester goes on, and then we can help them a little bit differently each time if we take that if we take that stand with them. It's harder for me virtually. I just don't get to know them as well.
Oh,
so I am also looking forward to having fewer classes delivered that way. It was just so much easier when we were all in a room together.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, when I guest lectured your class that day, so I've been teaching online from home asynchronously. So we never actually meet live since March of 20.
Yeah.
And so the first time I got to be with a group of young people and talk about early childhood stuff was when I guest lectured your class a few weeks ago. And that was such a joy.
Yeah.
And I think that they got a lot out of it.
Yeah,
so
they're a
for
good
me,
group.
in my world, as I'm planning my spring schedule, at the very least, my classes will be what we call LRON. I don't know what that means, but it's the ones where they're online, but you do meet virtually at least once a week.
Uh-huh.
And that's what I'm going to be doing, because although you're right, it's sad and disappointing. It can never be what it's like in person. We can't sit on the ground and play duck, duck, goose or whatever crazy thing I'm going to have them do.
Yeah.
But it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
And it's a chance to connect with other human beings. And that's part of it. I feel like.
Definitely.
You can't be playful in a vacuum.
Yep. And you can't model best practices for teaching children in a format that doesn't allow, I don't know, better interaction, more connection.
Yeah. Any interaction.
Humanity.
They watch videos of me giving playful lectures, quote unquote. But at the end of the day, it's still me talking. And that's not what young children or college students need.
Right. Yep. Well, then, we've all got some thinking to do.
Indeed. Or not. I mean, I think the first step is to get out of our heads.
Oh,
and
sure.
Just sing and dance and play.
Yeah.
Stop thinking so much, nerds.
How dare you, first of all. And second of all, thank you. I do recommend the book. It seems like it was sort of hard for me to track down when I went to order it, but I think I eventually got it from NACI.
It's an oldie but a goodie.
Yeah, and it's a newer edition, but I don't know that it's changed much from the original.
Yeah, even though it was written 20 something years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
The wisdom in there, that's the thing. Just a side note about early childhood.
Yeah.
Because I used to be a textbook editor.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times, one of the rules of thumb is you can't cite anything that's more than 3 years old, because the research changes so much in our field.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. I get the logic of that. But there also in our field, in terms of working with young children, there are ideas that are timeless.
Yeah.
There are things our grandmothers knew that turned out to be, they were always correct. It's just now we have the neurological research to show it.
Yeah.
So don't always discount a book like
because
Elizabeth Jones's book that's 20 years old.
Yeah.
There are some you definitely should discount that are 20 years old. But
there's some you should discount that came out last year.
What's that? Yes.
There's some you should discount that came out last year. And
you have to look with an intentional, careful eye. And for whatever it's worth, Heather and I think this one still has ageless wisdom in it that's still very helpful.
Definitely. And that's
not true for all of them.
It'll rattle some cages too. She basically lets them grade themselves and discusses why she does that. And it was really a good read. And I'm looking forward to I just went back when I got it out for this episode and just read what I had highlighted, reread all that stuff, but I'm going to give it another good look here later this week.
Yeah. I mean, I read it for the first time 20 years ago, but now I've spent 20 some odd years being a cage rattler. And I've lived to tell it. Nothing has killed me.
Yeah.
So, read it and go out and rattle cages. Heather and I need you to, because some of those cages we and the young children should not be in.
That's absolutely right.
And let me just say that little statement is in memory of our dear Dan Hodgins, who once said almost those exact same words.
Yes. Yeah. We need an episode about Dan. It's coming.
Yes.
It's coming when I can get everybody together for that. Okay. Well, thank you, Richard. This was fun as always. Went long as we always do. But it was great. And I just am grateful to be recording again after a while.
Me too.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening. Come back again for another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. Goodbye.